Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Night. With me today I've got Rachel Vecht, and we're going to be talking about boundaries and what are boundaries, both in work and in life and in family. And before we get into that, Rachel, Happy New Year. And where can people find you?
Same to you. Probably the best place to find me is on LinkedIn under my name, Rachel Vecht. Also my website, which is educatingmatters.co.uk.
So, so to get into the conversation, you do a lot of work, don't you, with people at work who have families and how they manage those families. And we were kind of talking about that before we went live, weren't we?
Yeah, exactly. So my background originally, many years ago, I was a school teacher. I had 4 kids, and I've spent, it's actually 24 years working with organisations to support people, whether they're parents, carers, with all aspects of integrating work and family, and specifically around raising children, because it is, you know, work is challenging for everyone, but when you've got those extra,
I think that I don't know about you, but COVID changed things, didn't it? From we had our work persona, and then we went home, and then because we were working from home, and we you know, people can now see both of our houses. That what all of a sudden there's this thing where, you know, children came in and stuff, and that started off where we had to apologize, and then it became normal, didn't it?
Yeah, it almost like humanized us. And it wasn't just, not just people with kids, it's pets or, you know, other responsibilities or the doorbell ringing, but you feel like there was a big shift that you don't have to kind of hide so much what's going on outside of work. But then it also means it's all kind of mushed together a bit more, and you don't have as clear boundaries. You know, coming into the office, you can, or wherever you work, you can separate the two. And that's why boundaries became, well, it was a huge topic during lockdown. I was sometimes doing 6 or 7 webinars a day, because people are like, there's no separation between like work and life.
So how do you define boundaries, and why are they so important for well-being?
Well, I like to use the word boundaries because, like, a very popular term is work-life balance. And to me, that immediately conjures up like this image of scales where you're constantly like, here's work, here's life, and I'm trying to make them all perfectly balanced. And I think that's completely unrealistic. And boundaries is more about, okay, what's really important to me, and how do I actually kind of create a boundary around that thing so that I can, you know, whether it's the main boundaries I'm talking about are work, obviously, family, which could be siblings, parents, your own children, it could be neighbors, whoever, and then yourself. So it's kind of, how do you protect each of those important elements of your life, because the truth is none of us are ever going to have enough time to do you, and then how you really prioritize those things.
Because I live in London, and everybody in London seems to have a dog apart from us.
Seems to have a what? A car?
A dog.
Oh, a dog. Well, no, after 4 children, I've set a big fat boundary around dogs, because at the end of the day, I'll be the one looking after it. I'm being a realist. I did say, if any of you want to research, get one. I'm not having anything to do with it. And they say in theory they want it, but it still hasn't arrived. So that's an example of setting a very firm boundary for myself. It's like, you're all free to do what you want, but let me just tell you, I'm not part of it.
So what are common boundary related challenges people often find in work and in the home?
Well, I think there's just a lot of general overwhelm. It's become this almost status symbol. But I think the thing is, first of all, as we've discussed, being able to be yourself at work, but also find time, not allow, this is what the problem is. When you're at work, you're thinking about all the things that you're maybe not doing at home or would like to be doing. And then when you're at home, you're feeling guilty about the work that you're not doing. So it's kind of being in each moment and maximizing that moment that you're in, so that you're either working productively or you're actually saying, and that's what the problem of technology is kind of splintering our experience of time. So if we're like at the end of the evening, we're saying like we're at home now and we're just going to enjoy quality time, because it's this 24/7 culture, it's very difficult to actually switch off. I've seen quite a lot on LinkedIn over the holidays of people even saying, you know, they carried on right? So for some people, their worst nightmare is to come back yesterday after being off work for a few weeks and having this mountain of emails, and they would rather manage it a bit as they go along. For someone else, they need that clear break. So I think they're really, really personal. And what we do is we get so stuck in the moment that we don't even pause and think, hang on, how do I want to manage, you know, my evenings or my lunch? You know, am I going to take a proper lunch break and go and get some exercise, or actually physically move and get something to eat? Or, you know, everyone has their own way of working, and you have to know yourself what works for you. And then obviously in a work environment, have you communicated that with your colleagues and your team? If it's people at home, like, these are my boundaries, this is how I want it to work. And people are quite difficult. Some people find it very hard to say no as well, which is why it's
yeah. Well, my next
question
is, how do we communicate those? Because the as you say, the culture seems to be we just work and work and work and work and work, and so there's an expectation you're online all the time.
Yeah, well, the culture kind of often comes from the top, so it's very important, depending on your position. For example, I work with a lot of really big corporate type style of organizations, that if anyone, this is again the difference where we started with COVID, people being much more open about their interests, their caring responsibilities, maybe mental health challenges, and not making out like in the old days that we've got everything all sorted. So it's important that if you have, you know, there's this whole idea of, for example, parenting out loud, that dads can be more open. In the old days, you would leave a jacket on the back of the chair and say, I'm just popping to a meeting, and they might be going to sports day. It's whatever your responsibilities are, being culture where other people within an organization can do the same. That's really important. But the first step is to be clear for yourself. Like, we imagine that our colleagues or our partners or friends or whoever are mind readers. And if we haven't got that real clarity for ourselves, I remember speaking to this CEO of a big recruitment company. So he's like, if he wants to do something, if he wants to exercise, if he wants to pick up his child from school once a week, he puts that very clearly in the diary, right? Everybody knows what he's doing. It's not just like a random generic meeting. Yeah. And if you want to get something done, well, when's that going to happen? How are you going to carve that time and be open with other people who are part of your life to help you stick to that?
And I was going to say, I mean, really, my next question is, what strategies can we implement? So is that really about time blocking and actually making sure that we've got enough under gym time, picking the kids up from school, taking the dog for a walk?
Well, I would even take it one step backwards, because that's like the logistics. My starting point, and when I work with individuals or family, it's being really, really clear on what is your why, what is your purpose, what are your values, because that dictates what you do next. Okay, so for some people, it's, I don't know, say one of their core values is work ethic. For somebody else, it's giving back to the community. For some, you know, someone else, obviously physical health is important for everybody, but it's like it's very personal. So working out with almost like I don't know if you've ever come across the work of Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly. You know, habit number 2 is begin with the end in mind. So being clear about your purpose and your why and your values. Like the beginning of the year is all about goal setting and aspirations, and then by February it's all gone out the window. But being like, what drives me? What am I all about? And then that gives me, you can't every single day assume that you're going to be aligned with those values, but that gives you that compass and direction. And then you get into, okay, on that list, and your priorities now might be different to, you know, by June slightly, they might have shifted. So how do I make sure what's really important to me, actually I can implement that? So whether it is, you know, at work, maybe articulating it to someone else and doing it together, or having some kind of accountability, but it's about creating systems that work for you.
And I guess we're all different because we're empty nesters, and one of our issues is the fact that we have elderly parents, whereas other people, it may be the fact that it's about nursery or the school run or something like that.
That they, you know, really care about outside of work, or whether it's a priority or responsibility. I can't remember what the numbers are, but the number of people that will end up, especially because people are living so much longer, being, like you say, a carer for an elderly relative, which also brings a whole nother load of, you know, responsibilities. And a lot, we do quite a lot of work with carers as well. And a lot of people say what's really different when you become a parent is, you know, you've suddenly got a child, you've adopted a child, you've given birth to a child. That's a very clear yesterday and today. But with caring, for example, it can be more of a slow, gradual process. You don't even necessarily kind of label yourself as being a carer, but over time you realize you're doing more and more.
Yeah, we've moved into the place where we're now the adults and they're now the children. Which is a place that my mother still says, "No, you're not." It's like, okay, Mom. So what happens when people cross the boundaries?
I think that obviously the most important thing, whether that's at home or at work, is the communication. So sometimes when people, you're saying other people cross your boundaries,
yes,
it can be because maybe you are being a bit wishy-washy about it and not being absolutely clear, or because, and this is why the scales are unrealistic, if something major at work is going on and there's some huge, depending on the nature, you know, I don't know, a lawyer might be up all night on a particular case, it's like everything else goes out the window, because you know for a short period of time getting in this report, preparing this presentation, whatever it is the number one like priority. Then, like with an elderly parent, if something major happens with their health, however important you thought this work thing is, then you need to kind of shift. So part of adulthood and the difficulty is there's so much, it's being, you know, flexible and adapting when you need to. So it's not, also it's that balance of not being like so rigid that I'm still going to do this thing even though this other thing has happened. So it's not, you know, it's not a perfect world, but you can try and if you don't even make it a priority, it's probably not going to happen.
What some of the things that when we talked on the preparation call, which I was really interested to dig into, which was around, we talked about work life and the boundaries, but you also talked about divisions of labor, especially at home.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Well, so what tends to happen? So we've got to the stage where in many relationships, I mean, in same-sex relationships, for example, there is less kind of predisposed expectations around who does what, and it's more about what you're good. And what's been happening a lot, because I've been speaking even during COVID when both parents are working from home, but for example in relationships it's become very common for both men and women to work and full time, but then you get home, and lots of research and studies showed even during COVID that still responsibilities for the household or for caring still fell more on females. So it's really important, rather than just kind of feeling resentful and like all the burden is on me, is to be very clear about whose responsibility it is to do what. So for example, I do a lot of work with supporting people in the transition of coming back to work after having a baby.
Yeah.
During that period of time, a partner may have been used to you picking up more of the, you know, day-to-day things at home because you're around. If you don't have that conversation when you go back to work, to say like, this can't continue. So you have to take every aspect of your life, whether it's birthday, like you meant, birthdays or holidays or whatever it is, electricity bills, car insurance is running out, you know, cooking, everything, or childcare responsibilities. And literally what we do is have a big Excel spreadsheet, literally jot down everything that needs to be done in different categories, and then be very clear about whose responsibility it is to do what. And does that responsibility mean someone else has to remind you, or are you really taking on the full responsibility of every aspect of that task? But getting that clarity around who does what. And that involves, like with caring, I don't know if you have siblings, for example, but like if you're caring for an elderly relative, who's doing which aspect? Is it about who lives nearer, or how are we sharing some of that load?
And you also talked about family expectations. What do you mean by that?
And you also talk about family expectations.
Well, I've got it's waiting to happen, but it's just to be really, really clear. So, for example, with expectations, if you so going back to what you said about being a carer.
Yeah.
So what happens, I know from working with a lot of different people, is when they were working from home, I don't know how, I haven't even talked about lockdown phases, because I think we started with that conversation. Because people were maybe working from home and more available, elderly relatives had that expectation that you were at their beck and call. But then when you're physically going back into an office with a long journey, you can't just take them to an appointment, or, you know, a child you might have an expectation of a child or a relative that isn't realistic. So again, it's about not doing that mind reading and actually openly saying, what are you expecting from me? This is what I'm expecting from you. This isn't working. Can we find a better? But really having that clarity about whether what you're expecting is, you've even expressed it, and if it's reasonable.
And in the last 2 minutes,
expectations of ourselves are also very unrealistic.
and in the last 2 minutes, what about looking after ourselves?
So everybody, you know, you roll your eyes, this concept of self-care, but how you feel physically and emotionally really is at the bedrock of everything else. And what happens is, exactly when you're overwhelmed, you've got loads going on at work, loads going on at home, the classic thing is just to completely neglect yourself. But we know that without enough sleep, physical exercise, whether it's you want to do yoga, or you want to read a book, or you know you need to get outdoors, it's about working out what it is that you need to keep everything as much as you can. The person needs to thrive is also very different. Could just be picking up the call to a friend for 5 minutes, but it's knowing what you need to just kind of feel grounded and feel in a good space physically and mentally, because without that, then anything relating to work or broader family life is going to become a lot more difficult to navigate.
And is that also about making sure that you're connected to your friends and the family as well as yourself?
Yeah, so for some people, the social element is really important. For other people, the most important thing is they run 10K every day, which isn't for me. But, you know, it's really, truly listening to your body and understanding yourself and what you need as an individual, and not falling into the trap of just neglecting that because you've got so much else going on. It will make it very difficult to be there for anyone else. That oxygen mask idea, you know, on a plane, take care of yourself.
Rachel, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. It's been a fascinating, it is a fascinating subject, a fascinating discussion. Thank you. Where can people find information about you?
So yeah, as I said, on LinkedIn under Rachel Vecht, that's the main form of social media I use. And my website, educatingmatters.co.uk, has got quite a lot more information and support about what we can provide.
And of course, you're more than happy to talk to people about any of these subjects.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming.